Well, kia ora, good afternoon, and welcome along to the Fortune Theatre for the first of our panel discussions for this year's New Zealand Young Writers Festival. And thanks to the Fortune for having us. Here is the official venue over the 3 remaining days through until Sunday night, wrapping up the performance of Counterpoint's 72 Hours and $72. Today we have from Auckland Duncan, Greive and Alex Casey from the television...
That's too rich.
I'd reserve the applause to the end, but...
We've got to get it at some point, you know. Yeah. By the end, it could get pretty grim.
From the Spinoff, which is a relatively new media empire in waiting, currently in the humble beginning stage, but doing a lot of really great work, with a particular focus on reality television in New Zealand. Not entirely sure if that was the intent, or whether that's happened organically as the project has grown. But they will be discussing today my reality rules, why Simon Cowell is not the only one enriched by our reality television, arguing in a roundabout fashion why we should be as interested in The Bachelor and X Factor as representations of ourselves on our own screens as we do about shows with higher production values and higher budgets, like Outrageous Fortune, West Side, etc. Duncan, Greive?
They've always been something that I've really liked, and to refer to what you said in the intro, it wasn't our intention to, when we set out to cover them so intently, but it has become something we've become known for and really enjoyed. And I guess there is something about those franchises and the way that they, like that sense of expectation that greets each new one coming on, because there is no, the cast is revealed in the process of the first episodes, and the process of kind of getting to know them, and they're bringing their sort of sense of their kind of hometowns and their preoccupations and interests all come to this, to whether it's to a kitchen or to a singing contest or to a love contest. You just get this sense of even within these very contrived environments, like a raw and unvarnished New Zealand, and I've always found that really bracing. And even though these things are very kind of they're tightly controlled and formatted shows, to the point where when something interesting happened on X Factor, they fired the 2 people who said the interesting thing. Nonetheless, there is that sense of it being slightly out of control and happening in this and just bringing these unfamiliar faces who aren't schooled or trained is I find incredibly bracing.
It's interesting, the point about how, so in drama, it's about introducing characters, but in the reality format, it's all about the reduction of characters. So it lays out everything at the beginning and then whittles it down to a point.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I guess, like, there's just something about like New Zealand has made a lot of great dramatic and comedic television. It's kind of impossible to deny. But I guess a lot of it seems to come from a fairly particular sensibility or point of view. And that's absolutely necessary and important. But I think in the process of defending or building that up, there's often that it involves necessarily a sort of a sweeping aside or diminishing of the merits of these shows, which have kind of much more ornery characters. I'm thinking of like the kind of girls we saw on New Zealand's Next Top Model and so on. And I don't think they need to be kind of sort of belittled in that way. I think we gain from both.
Alex?
Well, I think, like, as you mentioned, those big kind of explosive, unscripted moments, especially it kind of feels like maybe it's this year. Maybe this is just because the website started and this is literally my whole life now. But it seems like the big moments like Joe Irvine on X Factor and even things like The Bachelorette's having DUIs and being fraudsters and all that kind of stuff. All that kind of stuff opens up quite a larger conversation a lot of the time. And I think it's doing something. I think when people start talking about these different characters and kind of deciding, are they allowed on reality TV? Is, Shea Bryder getting kicked off? Like all that kind of stuff. I think it's adding to a bigger thing than just reality. And I feel like those kind of bizarre newsy moments are really interesting and are kind of providing something that you would not get in like a drama. There's no kind of news spillover or kind of big social talking about nothing trivial, There's nothing controversial in that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And, like with the Shea Bryder, that was, because of what happened with like Jovan and Natalia Kills and so on, that kind of got swept aside a little bit. That was like a conversation about at what point a man has atoned for something and about how something should be weighed, and which wouldn't have happened in an American version of this franchise, incidentally. And that's kind of one of the things I really like about New Zealand doing these things is that we still have the same graphics and the same theme music and so on, but inescapably some of us seeps into the production, whether it's through a lack of budget or a lack of oversight. Like Julie Christie. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's kind of cool. Like when they go and rather than flying off to some glamorous location with everything perfect, you can really see the seams with our reality franchises, and that's kind of how we've always had to make do. And as a nation, I like it.
You admitted yourself, though, that even X Factor became too much for you in terms of you had completely lost interest in that. Do you think that's a turning point for you, or do you think it's an anomaly in your obsession with New Zealand's reality TV franchises?
I think it's an anomaly. I hope it's an anomaly. I really enjoy them, and if that can't be what we've been reduced to.
And there's no more X Factor anymore after this season. We're not allowed it.
They basically revoked our license to create X Factor.
Because of the Natalia Kills
we
thing?
Screwed it up.
Between that and Shea Bryder, like the biggest X Factor as a franchise news stories of the year were both from New Zealand and were both incredibly negative. And Simon Cowell's like, you pay us like $15 to make this thing. I'm over you guys down there causing trouble. But yeah, and I think that with X Factor this year, it did. They were in a real bind. They had these electrifying judges who said unconscionable things, and they basically were. They didn't fire them. We fired them as an observing. Yeah, they just got absolutely trashed, and from that moment on, they could only replace. Like the reputational risk of replacing with anyone good, because of the amount of scrutiny that they would be under, was too great. So they had to replace them with the single blandest people I've ever seen on a television, maybe excluding the cast of Our First Home. But so it just became, from that moment on, that it was doomed. It didn't help that all the contestants were like kind of born again Christians or something. That made the intro videos pretty kind of samey, but it tested my faith.
That's great, so to speak.
Yeah.
I mean, it is quite telling, that you can. That the New Zealand Twitter community essentially can sink a judge's fortunes. Like, inflammatory things are sewn into the very DNA of the talent show format. I mean, that is the job of at least one, if not multiple judges to do that. And it's like New Zealand just couldn't handle it. Like, it wasn't, it was extreme, I guess, even by reality TV standards, but it is amazing how quickly they buckled, particularly given, from a cynical point of view, that was the peak of the ratings for that show.
I didn't think anyone, though, at MediaWorks was happy with it. I don't think there was anyone championing Natalia and Willie. Not unfortunately, but it seems like maybe if this had happened in a different place, in a different climate, they might have been just stuck it out or something. I don't know. I was surprised that they got axed so quickly, but Duncan had called it within 10 minutes, so I'm just a rookie. Duncan's a genius.
That's why I'm sitting here talking about reality television. I felt like they were going to go, not so much because of the kind of intensity or the inflammatory nature of what they said, more because it was so weird. It was almost too weird to exist. Like if you've got people who will say, because someone's wearing a suit, incidentally,
Yeah.
what are you doing? You're humiliating Willie Moon, it's embarrassing. You know, like, because...
I can sing, it would really rub salt into the wounds, yeah.
Yeah. Because of that, you know, you almost... You had no idea what they were going to do next. It was they'd proved their volatility and uncontrollability. Like, if they'd picked something that they'd done quite badly and said that it was the worst thing that ever happened, well, that's understandable. But something completely innocuous to be blown out the way it was, I feel like, you know, between that and, you know, there were those earlier, like there was the bakery incident, you know, which MediaWorks issued an apology for, and Willie Moon kind of resolutely refused to stand behind the apology. Natalia swearing at the audience. It was like a third strike, and it was a really big one.
Do you think it was an exit strategy?
Well, that's what I've been told, was that she had a job on Fashion Police, like waiting for her, but she did her job of getting fired too well to the point where they just went, oh,
Yeah.
you know, you're unhirable now.
Another thing with X Factor is that I think another massive problem this season is that I heard recently is that they not fired, but in season 1 they had about 4 like story producer people who would work on each contestant, fleshing out their backstory and kind of giving them humanity. But this time they didn't have any. So it was all kind of, that's why in all their kind of intro videos it was just them at the X Factor house or them, you know, just practicing rather than understanding who they were as a person, being in their hometown, seeing their stories. Apparently a lot of them had some really incredible backstories, like one of the vibes, I think, like went through cancer as a child and now spends all his time in children's hospitals and stuff, but you just don't know any of it. They're just like funny guys in pajamas, you know?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because they never moved and they never became three-dimensional characters in X Factor, and you know that was a huge part of the appeal of those shows. Wasn't just the gathering together of people from, you know, who were kind of self-selecting from various parts of the country for like Kitchen Rules or Next Top Model or Idol or whatever. It was understanding what it was about them as people that made them interesting and kind of drove them to the situation. With X Factor, was just, I like singing. And that isn't ever enough, you know?
It seems, because there was a previous incarnation of X Factor in New Zealand, and I think 2003, 2004, and the judges from memory were Michael Hurst and Stacey Daniels and someone else whose name... But it's impossible now to find any trace of this.
What was it?
It was called The X Factor. No, I don't think so. Because they did the regional thing. I volunteered on the set of the Dunedin auditions,
Right.
and I have really vivid memories of someone telling me like their talent or their X Factor was telling a story about their troubled childhood and having. It was quite an awkward moment, but it was also it was the first time, I guess, someone was having an emotional breakdown in the foyer, and the producer of the show got incredibly excited. It's like, I need all cameras in the lobby. Someone's in tears out there. And it's like, this is. I was a comms student at the university at the time. It's like, oh my god, this is actually how people prey on tears for a living.
Yeah, the sausage is made of tears.
Reality television, though, is more than franchise shows where people want to be famous. It's also any story of ours that we're prepared to sign a waiver for, or at least are too anxious to try and opt out of. There's nothing quite as intimidating as walking through customs. I don't know if you've been in this situation and there's a big sign that says, we're currently filming Border Patrol. Please see someone if you want to opt out of being filmed. It's like, I can't imagine a shorter trip to a room to the side than saying, please don't put me in your episode of Border Patrol. Or at least, so whether it's the advocacy journalism of something like Fair Go or Campbell Live, or slightly more brutal versions of the same, so Neighbours at War, etc. I mean, someone has beef, sometimes it's mutual. They've turned to television producers to try and resolve whatever their crisis is, or whatever their beef is. So it is far broader than the franchise concept. And there's something. I mean, you want to talk about the raw nature of New Zealand's reality television contestants, it doesn't. I mean, Neighbours at War is a perfect example of that. So it's not just superstar franchises. You know, it's a broader thing.
Yeah, I think, I mean, Neighbours at War, I would put in a time capsule as like one of a few, you know, a fairly small number of cultural artifacts that kind of tell our story, you know, to use a Te Papa-like phrase. But precisely because, you know, these are, I think you wrote in your sort of notes before we came on about, you know, Invercargill people being excited to see kind of local people on QTV. They're television outside of these formats and you know, radio, most broadcast mediums tend to kind of skew toward a very particular kind of person who has almost been heading that way their whole lives. You know, they're very kind of culturally aware. They're very aware of the medium and what it's seeking. Whereas Neighbours at War just sort of swoops down into the lives of, you know, your stereotypical ordinary New Zealander who's going about their business until they find that whoever they share a driveway with is an absolute maniac. And there really aren't, I mean, it sounds too stupid to say, but I feel like, quite aside from the entertainment value, there aren't a lot of avenues for settling this kind of, you know, you could go to the small claims court or try and call just annoy the hell out of council, you know. I mean, there are ways of doing it, but Neighbours at War is kind of interceding and then plopping some arbitrary New Zealander, you know, who's about 15 years past their prime, and to try and make them hold hands and make up. It's this extraordinary sort of approach, and a very, you know, yeah, it seems to work reasonably frequently in terms of exposing it. But there's just something about being in these people's homes, watching, you know, their sort of nervous tics, looking at you know, there's a voyeuristic element, but also like I find it quite gratifying, you know, because it is so different to the rest of the New Zealand that we see presented to us a lot of the time.
What possesses someone? I mean, I've had grievances.
Don't get me wrong.
Don't get me wrong. But it has never occurred to me to take that avenue. It's like I want to publicly share my grievances. I mean, you would think, I mean, your natural reaction would be, this is an act of desperation.
Maybe it is. Maybe they've been through hell with that driveway for years.
But they don't always. I mean, some of Neighbours at War in particular. I mean, some of the episodes are more fractious than others. But is it just that we down as a culture? It's a very downplayed kind of thing. You know what I mean? It's like if you're so desperate that you have to air this publicly on national television, surely you would be in hysterics constantly if this is you at the end of your proverbial tether. And yet it's just, as you say, just like everyday life. It's just there's a TV crew in the corner of my kitchen and I'm just going about my business and trying not to make direct eye contact with the lens, as I am now.
I think it's something to be said for people just wanting, like, because they're so passionate often in Neighbours at War about whatever issue it is. It's something about just documenting justice served and just getting on telly. I think might be a big thing. It's just people might want to be like, keep the tape if this happens again, you know? They've got evidence. Maybe it's like a long game, you know?
It could be. I mean, I do think that there is that sense of having, you've been saying it to your, you know, significant other or your family or whatever forever, to have like a third party, an outside arbiter come in. I'm sure that there's a sense of kind of release that comes with it. But I mean, you can only kind of speculate as to motivations of people going on there. I guess a lot of people probably don't find it as humiliating as we might imagine it to be. I'm trying to figure out instantly whether I should put myself forward to go on the New Zealand version of Come Dine With Me, which is shooting. Like, I'm a very, very bad chef. But I sort of think there's part of, like, if I'm willing to write about all these people in this kind of like rabid style, I should also be willing to be one of them. I'm sure I'll get like plucked out by MediaWorks' people before I get anywhere near the process, but I almost think, well, you got to do it, and I, you know, like, that's why I find, you know, like, even the heroes and villains that come out of these things, I sort of struggle to actively, you know, despise them, whatever their actions might be, because there's something kind of beautiful and poetic about their willingness to go and do this tremendously anxiety-inducing thing, especially in a social media era, putting themselves in front of us. I think it's kind of sweet. In a small country particularly, in America you can just move to a different state or whatever and start it fresh. There's not that many of us, you're stuck with that maniac with the driveway problem for your whole life.
Come Dine With Me is a really interesting example, actually, because it's a show where the script is so important and so obviously important. I mean, if you strip out the acerbic voiceover in Come Dine With Me, you're not left with a lot, just some mediocre cooking, for example.
I don't know, because it's kind of like that part of Come Dine With Me is the best part of My Kitchen Rules. At the very start of that cooking show, they have essentially the same thing where they go around to each other's houses and cook. And I feel like there's a real value in just seeing people's like gross kitchens and like, because they don't have I think it was something, it might have been the Great Food Race or one of these other TV3 endeavours that didn't go very well. But with My Kitchen Rules, I think they give you a fake house if your house isn't like up to scratch. With the Great Food Race, you were just crammed into like 8-person flats, and there was just like kitchen roll everywhere and stuff. And I feel like, voiceover aside, there's something to be said for just going in and seeing like New Zealand people in their homes, kind of unpolished, unscripted, just kitchen roll everywhere.
And there's a perverse, I don't know if it's Schadenfreude or not, but there's a pleasure to be derived from seeing people's endeavours that they hold in such high regard that obviously isn't very... I mean, there are a lot of people on Come Dine With Me who think of themselves as... They don't maybe have the same self-awareness as you, Duncan, who think of themselves as great cooks but are obviously not. And that's kind of the part of the dramatic tension of that show, right? Is that dynamic between perception and reality of their own talents.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, like I've been watching a lot of the English version of that show lately, and
in preparation.
Just because it's what I like to do. We all
Omnibus, yeah.
And it just, I don't know, like, if you watch a lot of prestige drama, which I do, it's very easy to sort of slowly, kind of, but surely get to this, your understanding of, America or England or whatever. It becomes kind of, it shrinks down to this kind of hardcore of these very smart, often very flawed, very articulate, and kind of willful people, and you start your kind of conception of the nation and what the world is like sort of can start to be coloured by that. And I was watching this this Come Dine With Me omnibus like last night. I'll be honest, and there's this amazing woman who was like, she was like 24, and the main thing she liked to tell everyone was that she'd had a rendezvous with Russell Brand. And she was so immensely proud of this achievement. And it was very sweet and very odd. And the way that all of the different, this kind of like, this Greek chancer guy and this sort of posh but, sort of former diplomat, the way they all responded to it, there is a sense of this weird kind of, as Alex said, being let into someone else's home, their life, their sensibilities and, predilections in a way that, we aspire to make with our drama, to show the lives of all New Zealanders. But when they're coming out of, like, a lot of them out of a few houses in kind of Greylin or Ponsonby, there's a limit to how, no matter how hard we try, how much we can how close we can get to delivering those kind of stories, in a way that obliquely these things end up doing.
I think my favourite series of Come Dine With Me featured the turntablist from Ash.
Ash, like turntablist?
Yeah, and so when they came to his house, he's like, "Oh, I've got awards," and he's like, he had like gold discs or whatever from when he'd served as the DJ, and it was, otherwise just a bookish accountant looking chap, as you'd expect the turntablist from Ash to be, maybe. But all of these, I mean, the things that all of these shows have in common is that you're essentially moulding material into a narrative rather than making a script out of your raw materials, as is the fashion in documentary, rather than drama, which works in the other direction. So it's an editing exercise to a large degree, and I wonder whether you, Duncan, as an editor, whether that makes up part of your fascination in terms of the construction of reality television.
I do think that, do find myself, when people kind of complain about the edit making something look a particular way, I think there was a lot of that when we talked to, we not going to brag about it, but we had Matilda from The Bachelor onto a podcast, around to our house. It's fine, it's cool. We're just great friends. And she would kind of refer to the fact that obviously certain incidents were kind of edited or managed to appear much more severe and confrontational than they were. And that becomes like a perpetual gripe of the post-reality TV show contestant, as they watch their fame kind of just sprinkling through their fingers, and they're sort of grabbing it, but it's never going to stay.
I'm just at Duncan Greive's house. What happened?
That's the peak. There is a part of me that's like, that is, that you have to go into it knowing what you're going to get into. In fact, that just reminds me of when I was like 19, I hope you're cringing right now, Leonie, I was on a sort of, I guess, a proto-reality show called Sweet As, which you definitely can't find online, so don't look, which followed like a set of young people and a set of older people to the revived Sweetwaters Festival. And I was a young moron, and they edited it to make me look like a young moron, which really annoyed me at the time. But with hindsight, like I should have been aware that that's kind of the job, And I think that, yes, so to reverse back into somewhere near your point, I think that is, I'm very cognizant of that all the time. I don't think it's necessarily a fascination about it, but I think that's when you are when you're watching the kind of anger and the passionate defense of various people on reality TV happen, you have to, the audience should perhaps be more aware that this is a construct that they're witnessing rather than their window into the person's soul.
Yeah, and by and large, they're not. And I mean, to the point where the audience gets angry when their suspension of disbelief is shaken to it's like, it's fake. They're just faking it. And it's all scripted. It's like, well, of course it's all scripted. It's like the 6 o'clock news is scripted. It's not a single, it's just an auto cue process. There's nothing that you watch or consume that isn't constructed in that way. But people do get really angry about it for
it's
some
an
reason.
Interesting thing now as well, like with things like The Bachelor, because there's so much of a social media presence now, the kind of need or failure to kind of adhere to those roles, like they're Instagramming and tweeting the whole time, but there's things like when, I don't know if anyone's familiar with the plot of The Bachelor, but when Crystal and Lisa had a spat about how Lisa was only there because she's the wild card, but then that night they had this whole Instagram session of their best friends, they're together, and I could feel like the people at MediaWorks probably like, please delete those, you idiots. So I reckon it's kind of interesting that the characters they're trying to enforce or trying to keep up don't always stick because of the diverse range of media around these shows now as well, is that they need to do it themselves, but they don't always want to.
Because how do you do that? I mean, because they've obviously taped it.
Yeah.
And I mean, you have to hibernate until your character gets booted off, and then you're allowed to reappear in Duncan Grieve's lounge.
Yeah, they all do it. Like, as soon as they get eliminated or as soon as a particular scene is aired, you just get a flood of crap on Instagram of like all these selfies from the moment, and you're like, you've been holding on to those for like 3 months. It's quite weird.
There is an argument that from a funding model perspective, because this is one of the perpetual gripes that comes up, is saying, why is this public broadcasting? Why is this being funded and supported by our public broadcasters, etc. There is an argument for popular determinism in funding, whereby, because a lot of people watch these shows, or even shows like Nothing Trivial or whatever, far more people will see them than a far more lavishly funded independent feature film that might do a lap of the festival circuit and then be retired, never to be heard of again. That the more popular cultural artifacts, whether it's reality TV or drama, are more worthy of funding because they have a bigger audience. Which I don't necessarily agree with, but I'm interested in your perspective on whether these are things that are worth supporting. I mean, your arguments about, this is a valid representation of New Zealand for New Zealanders would suggest that you wouldn't have that same grief necessarily with it being funded as a production.
No, I have no issue with them being funded at all. In fact, I think that they represent incredible value for money. If you see the extent to which they have access to and exploit other funding mechanisms with, sponsorships and, like they have huge kind of online presences, and so you talk about product placements, like these are almost like shows dressed up around a product a lot of the time. But I don't think that makes them any less sort of culturally valid. And in fact, it sort of irks me that New Zealand On Air has now publicly said that they'll never fund another season of X Factor. I mean, irks me on one level and also makes me incredibly happy on another. Part of me that would have to watch it, but I think they're doing it for the wrong reasons, to kind of paraphrase a bachelorism. I guess the funding thing. I guess like a lot of it comes down to how you feel about the phrase public broadcasting. Do you feel like a sort of a small group, whether they're the head of Radio New Zealand or the board of New Zealand On Air, should be deciding what's good for people, or do you think that people are pretty good at deciding that themselves? And I've always kind of, whether it's sort of music or anything else, I always feel like people are pretty good at, your phrase popular determinism. I do think that if these things are really popular, then people are getting something out of them. Like this idea that we're kind of trying to weigh the nutritional value of a program, like the extent to which it speaks to ourselves. I think that that's not something you can empirically prove. And there are sort of lobby groups and guilds and so on who are out there trying to say yes, drama is important, and it is, but I don't think it, if you look at the massive funding disparity between, like a Step Dave, it was funded for $6.8 million.
Which sounds like a phenomenal amount of money. I mean, I don't have a point of reference really for what producing a show like that would cost, but that sounds at least.
It seems like a lot of money when you know that, Louis C.K.'s Louis is made for $250,000 an episode, which obviously is kind of an outlier. He calls in all kinds of favors and does almost everything on the show himself. But I do think the fact that you could make, 8 or 9 seasons of X Factor, which is literally, I think, 10,000 hours long this year, for that amount of money is kind of, I think it demands more kind of weighing and arguing back and forth than, this one, it's good for us, and this one's kind of cheap trash. So that kind of goes to the X Factor. The whole other side of things, like I watched a show called Keeping Up with the Kaimanawas aired for the first time this week, which was hilariously reported as having the potential to be as big as Keeping Up with the Kardashians by the Northland Age. Because it definitely doesn't have anything like that potential. But it's about this kind of these three Northland sisters who are charged with breaking in and kind of civilizing. I don't know, it's probably some kind of analogy that you could draw there, but I'm not going to. The wild horses of the Kaimanawas, and they're amazing women, and they are doing something extraordinary. And yes, the show was funded. I think it got about $400,000, but I would rather see some I feel like there are so many more stories like that around, and it'll be cool to see more of them, and to see us try and make more X Factors and maybe one or two fewer, because it is literally, you make one less step, Dave, and you can make 20 of those shows, and you do have to try and weigh those.
And that allows you more space to fail when you've got a larger pool. Well, I mean, not all of these shows are going to be successful, but if you're only making a handful, it seems far more dramatic when they do bomb.
Yeah, and I mean, and we've moved that way with our music funding. We used to fund $50,000 albums every time. And that was supposedly the maximum, but I think in 5 years, only one album was ever made for less than that, and it was $40,000. So whereas now it's almost like more of a venture capital seed funding. You can get 3 rounds of $10,000 to record singles, and something about that seems preferable to me. There's always been this argument about the prestige drama thing. Everyone points to Denmark and says, look at what they've done with The Bridge, look at what they've done with The Killing, and they now export these shows overseas, and it's helped their brand, the same way that The Hobbit has helped ours. But I feel like maybe that might be beyond us, that might not be something we're good at. But we're clearly, you look at Pop Idol, which essentially birthed both Idol and X Factor. We're clearly good at that. And I think if we were less kind of sniffy about reality television, we could say, how about we just try and make a bunch of different franchises, allow them to, as you said, fail fast, just like you would in Silicon Valley, and periodically, and focus on licensing them to different territories. I'd have no issue with that.
Remember to keep the licensing this time.
Yeah, that is the issue.
What could have been? I mean, the DR model, the Denmark model, is really interesting because that is their state television that produces a lot of it, but it's a far more homogenous society there.
Yes.
So they don't feel compelled to cater to a multiplicity of cultural voices. So they can just focus on, monolith shows like The Bridge or whatever, without fear of alienating people by just having middle-class white people on the screen all the time. Are we being snobs, Alex?
I don't know. Well, I'm just thinking like the Almighty
not
Johnsons.
Duncan, me, but
the Almighty Johnsons got sold to Russia, so it's all good. And that's for middle-class white superhero men, right?
Norse gods. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. That doesn't seem to be catering to a lot of New Zealand, I'd say.
No, but I guess my point is, if you have a budget of X for what you see as public interest television, and some of that will be funneled off to Karere, and some of that will be funneled off into different places, and some of it will be catering to pale, stale males. Yeah. You have more people that you feel you are compelled to represent than a monoculture does when they go to divide up their budgets, which I guess is my point. But in terms of, and because the public interest is something that we talk about in terms of journalism, but it does feel quite odd to talk about it in terms of creative pursuits. Like, can there be public interest creative pursuit at all? I mean,
yeah, and I have kind of had moments to doubt whether, I think you can, and I do think in general it's healthy for a society, particularly a small one that can feel like its culture is at risk of being swamped at all times by very good stories coming from overseas, but that just happen not to be our own. There is the argument with the prestige drama is that you can find other ways to fund X Factor, you can find other ways to fund journalism, or you could, but prestige drama is too expensive to make, to do properly, without public funding. And I guess I have some sympathy for that. I've always, as I said before, been of the opinion that I think you can be quite narrow in your definition of what the public interest is, and it's a very nebulous concept. Like, the idea that someone who watches the Almighty Johnsons, are they deriving, whatever the component part, if their share of watching is $15 for that episode, are they getting $15 worth of benefit versus the 4 cents that a particular hour of X Factor cost, on a per capita per minute type basis? I think if you're trying to weigh those things as a public official, I have no idea how you would do that. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it. I'm not saying that it's not an important job, but Jesus Christ, it's difficult.
What about representation, though? Because some things like X Factor, if you're looking at representing different ages, genders, cultures, shows like that manage to have a lot wider spread than most dramas, I think. And especially, if we're going to go even deeper, like Homai Te Paki Paki, which I am like a champion every Friday night, which is like the Māori TV karaoke show. That just goes from, 10-year-olds to bloody 70-year-olds from all over, seemingly New Zealand. I don't know how they get to Newmarket so quickly. But
So quickly.
And I feel like, I don't understand how it works. They go on a ballot and they get pulled up. Anyway, I'll figure it out one day. But I feel like that is made for like $2. The production values are so cheap, but it's so kind of joyous and exciting to watch. And I don't know what the main purpose of public service, whatever funding and stuff is. But if it's getting the most diverse range of New Zealanders on screen, I think reality is a really good way to do that.
Yeah, I so agree. And I think, you saw that with X Factor, where you had like a Samoan New Zealander, a Māori and Cook Island New Zealander, and Stevie Tonks all on screen. And, like hearing the Beau's kind of vernacular and seeing his family, like if that was on Shortland Street, it would have been the most like, kind of Greyland imagination or, sort of conceptualizing of what that kind of language and scene would look like. And it'll be incredibly well-intentioned and probably still valuable, but it would have been false in a way that there was something.
It was true.
Yeah, well, like that was a real family. You could have just parachuted into anywhere in kind of in South Auckland and got some kind of like a similar kind of a scene, and that is not a situation you regularly find on television in front of. Yeah, okay, so it was 300,000 this time, but last time it was like 500,000 people. That has to have value. So the fact that won't be happening again, that is as much as I hated the show with all my heart. By the end, there is a sense of loss for those kind of moments that they provided that just don't come up.
What was it? Was there a turning point for you, Duncan? Because the received wisdom is that they keep all the controversial ones. It's all rigged, so the controversial ones stay there until the end.
It wasn't rigged. I wish it was rigged.
Because that was the issue, right? Like it drained out a lot of the personalities. Well before the show.
No, I don't think it was the personalities. I don't think any of them had good personalities. Sorry. I just don't. But I thought that the musically interesting one, May Valley, when May Valley left, that was at the end for me. I thought May Valley were really good. Can't really defend that or justify it in any sense. But there was a sense that the musically interesting ones went in favour of the handsome ones, which is unfortunate.
Well, it's life, isn't it?
If
you reality television,
yeah,
welcome to the music business.
It's brutal reality.
A lecturer of mine, when I was some years ago now, but studying in communications, doing a paper on television, was quite fond of saying that television was a dead medium, which I always found.
Classic lecturer.
Yeah, which was amazing for that paper, and I ran into him recently. And one of the symptoms of television being a dead medium, we were told, was the prevalence of reality television programming. This was the symptom. And I ran into him again recently and reminded him of this. He said, I don't teach that anymore and I don't argue that anymore because, we've moved into a different phase. And I do wonder what the resurgence of prestige drama internationally, what that means for the future of reality television when now all of a sudden there are alternatives that are worth watching when, 10, 15 years ago it seemed like people watched it because that was all there was. And now there are, multitude of options, particularly coming out of the US cable network, I suppose. Is that a threat, do you think?
I don't think so. I don't think it's an either or. I think you can enjoy both as much as you want. But I do think we are seeing like a reaction to maybe the kind of production values and I guess the idea of like event viewing that reality TV is kind of taking on. Especially, I don't know, I guess things like the US Bachelorette at the moment, I told you I'd talk about it, it's coming out, is humongous in its kind of, the 80-minute episodes, it is event television, you have to be watching it, it's like the internet goes crazy, and even you see it here, like the amount of emphasis on hashtags, as stupid or as ridiculous as they are, popping up every 10 minutes, and I think really creating chatter and culture around it, especially like our website and stuff like that, it feels like reality TV is creating something else, which is definitely separate from that kind of prestige viewing, but doesn't necessarily have to replace or compete with it. I think you can do both. But yeah, I do think that, the X Factor episodes at the start were how long? Like 3 hours or so? They really make it a thing to do. You get people around, you sit down, and you just tough it out, like no matter how long it is.
Or you watch it alone in your room typing furiously.
Exactly, yeah. And something else that a lot of people have said, including Hilary Barry, just dropping a little name there, was that it's great for families, like reality TV, things like X Factor, maybe not so much The Bachelor and stuff, I don't know how families react
Great role
to
modeling,
that. Yeah. This is what life is like. Especially things like X Factor and Dancing with the Stars, I'm assuming, are really good viewing for parents and kids. I know, Duncan, you watch all of those with your kids, and it's kind of like a group viewing. It's kind of almost like a return to sit down and put the telly on as a family. And whether you think it's a good or bad thing, I think it's something that's happening and happening again.
Yeah, I do think I think Alex is right. That, like in an era where we are kind of divided into niches a lot more, which and some of those things are sort of self-reinforcing identity. Like people are much more likely to kind of publicly talk about their love for prestige drama than kind of trashy reality, but if you're not watching Mad Men, it's really you can't really talk about it with someone else, and you're not likely to kind of because the audience, despite the volume of that was a transcendent show. I loved it with all my heart, but there was a lot of noise about its finishing. But I'd be shocked if more than sort of 60, 70,000 New Zealanders actually watched the finale. And I do think that sense of, whereas The Bachelor was getting up near, between live, delayed and on-demand viewing and live streaming, which they've introduced recently, was getting up near sort of the 500,000 mark. And, it does bridge kind of, ages, genders, ethnicities, and like Alex, you were saying that you've talked about The Bachelor with almost all of your Uber drivers.
Anyone. That's all I know how to talk about. I'm like
yeah, it's something pretty binary at this point. But I think that unifying factor that you can't really. I don't think people should rush to discount that. Because the nominal kind of nutritional value of the artifact.
Yeah, I guess I'd never really considered it, but just picking up on Alex's point, it's not wholly dissimilar from the British light entertainment programming tradition, to say nothing of the hosts of a lot of those shows. But there is that kind of variety show format, isn't and that's so, which is by definition our colonial cultural heritage as well. So, but I don't know I don't know much about the light entertainment scene in the United States, but because I remember as a kid watching things like Ian Fraser's Showcase and those sorts of televised talent shows. It's not a new concept.
Britain's Got Talent is still currently one of if not, I think it's New Zealand's biggest show. The most highly rated show in New Zealand is Britain's Got Talent. now.
Wow.
More
than Shortland Street?
Yeah, like double Shortland Street. And a few years ago, Dancing with the Stars, when it aired in New Zealand, was rating over 800,000, which is like a phenomenal number. Nothing would get close to that now. So, I think that is, that light entertainment tradition you talk about, like, there aren't actually that many shows that you can put a 4-year-old and an 80-year-old in front of and that they can kind of just chill on. And it's so easy to be kind of sniffy about that, but there is a value in it, because there aren't many things in society that kind of that you can that do cause you to kind of reach out your hands across the aisle. You know what I mean? Like
it's marketing, to say nothing of its marketing genius.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
And that's that helps fund the thing so that we don't have to the same extent.
The community aspect of it, like whether it's online or in person, and the fact that we're having this conversation at all, because it is still a regular weekly show, or thrice weekly show, if that's the format. In an era where consumption of particularly prestige drama, but television generally, is accelerated. So we talk about binge watching shows, entire series over a weekend. And it's constantly on edge when you're trying to talk about it, because I might be 2 weeks behind you, or whatever the situation is. That can't exist, because it's still the reality franchise still exists in a time when on its own terms. So the community is perhaps easier to control and foster than it is for these other shows, because that kind of interaction seems to be, if not the main point of it, it's certainly one of the things that drives it in terms of how popular it is.
Yeah, I think like you say, I think there's a lot of fear around trying to have these international discussions, like because of spoilers and all of that stuff. And I feel like New Zealand's always suffered from that, because we're always delayed, we're always behind, or we never see the light of, shows never get to us.
Still waiting on Broad City season 2.
Still waiting on a lot of things.
I hear it's good.
And this is this is the antidote to that. This, and maybe, I guess, things like Shortland Street, which are ours and come to us all at the same time. Yeah, I think it has a lot of worth because of that timeliness, that you can go, did you watch The Bachelor last night? Or I can say, did you watch The Bachelor last night? To everyone around me. And even if they haven't, they're going to have a reason to be like, no, I didn't, and this is why. And then you have a chat, And that's why I like it.
It's mainly them just listening.
Maybe.
Yeah.
It could be. The Uber drivers, they can't talk very much, they've got to drive.
But they love it.
Oh, yeah.
We're really confident.
Do you have shows in mind, Duncan, when you say, maybe we should refocus and make reality television our niche in the way that...
Can I pitch you some shows? I didn't come prepared with any, but it does seem like there's and it does, on one hand you can say that it does feel like almost every reality show that doesn't involve like death as a natural consequence of it coming out rather than an accidental one has been made. I'm thinking, like we were talking on the way down about the tricking genre that was in vogue for a while. Like there's something about Miriam and
there was one called I Want to Marry Harry, where they told a whole lot of women that they were in the running to marry Prince Harry, but it was just a guy who looked a little bit like him. And they're like, that's fine. They're not going to mind.
Was the entire cast short-sighted? Was that part of the screening?
No, just not.
You're in 2 of 8 episodes.
Yeah, that's right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Tremendous success.
Yeah, but yeah, there was it got real dark for a while there, I reckon. Like that, there's something about Miriam was a transgender woman, and they didn't tell the bachelors, I guess, that it was. And they did another one that was called Boy Meets Boy, that was, I guess, kind of like a gay bachelor, but half of them were actors, straight actors, half of them were gay men. It was just like, those things just seemed like an absolute disaster, and that's where you've got to draw the line.
That's a long way from saying he's really rich, but it turns out he's not really rich.
Exactly, yeah.
And what is the function of having like a bunch of actors like they're just pretending to be gay? I don't know.
Yeah.
That seems horrible. But I mean, it is. I mean, and part of the criticism of reality, going back to what you're saying about New Zealand coming up with more of these ideas, is that it is kind of relentlessly lowbrow or actively working to destroy the human race. But I do think that there's there was particularly last year, it felt like there were a few kind of shows that started to move beyond that, to have almost like an aspirational quality to them, that almost drew from some of the big ideas of the prestige dramas. I'm thinking of Utopia, which was this show which I think had a similar kind of, ran for a while and got cancelled, but I think Fox spent somewhere like $50 million, which is like Game of Thrones kind of money, making this show that was going to play online and air for hours every night, that was just going to cover this group of people trying to build a new society with kind of a very rudimentary I guess stuff to use, and it ended up the first night they got really drunk and went and ordered pizza, and it just kind of got real. They never really were isolated enough, from there, and people kind of needed medical attention and got it rather than just having to kind of sew up their own stomachs.
Just want to see people dying.
Yeah, I want to see people dying. Is it too much to ask? But I do think that will come, that we'll start to see kind of more pure-hearted and well-executed versions of that, because reality TV, it really is very young. It's maybe 15, 17 years old. But, it obviously has kind of predecessors. I'm thinking of Sylvania Waters. Did you? I feel like maybe I've talked to you about it. But there's this Australian show that was set in the Shires, and I just remember I was maybe 10 years old when it aired, but there was a woman, Nolene, who was still one of the most magnetic. She was like a mother struggling to keep this really troubled family together, and it aired over a long time. It was very serious-minded, and there was it was so harrowing when it aired. I think that it kind of put people off trying to attempt it for that kind of thing for a few years. But you're starting to see that. That come back. I'm thinking now, with things like Struggle Street, and that kind of, which, was it scum porn?
Yes, poverty porn.
Poverty porn. That's right. So it's not particularly.
That's the Benefit Street franchise.
Benefit Street, yeah. I think there is there's a danger in that, but there is a sort of a meeting of, documentary and reality that is starting to put out really good things. And I think when you've got people who've grown up with reality but have aspirations for the medium, kind of kicking it down the road in kind of 5, 10 years, we will start to see some really, almost like a prestige reality come around. And maybe New Zealand has a hand in that. Oh, you're smirking, but I believe it.
I think also things like, we've got Bogans coming later this year, and things like the GC, whatever your opinion on that. I think those almost documentary/reality looks into particular subcultures is something that New Zealand could do really well. Just in the car on the way here, Duncan, you actually did have an idea about one set in a delivery factory, just things set in kind of like middle New Zealand, regional, spending time with the characters, getting to know them, and framing a documentary/reality show out of that, I think is something we could do really well. I mean, things like Wayne Anderson, singer of songs, wherever that comes in to the spectrum, whatever that is, we need. Yeah, good choice of words there. But we need more of that, and whether that, I'm sure there are a lot more Wayne Anderson types out there, if not cultures like that we can find and kind of unearth, because that was criminally underplayed, I think.
Yeah. An amazing, but it's hard, that whole idea of consent, and I mean, and the Struggle Street, Benefit Street is obviously the extreme end of that. Yeah. But is he in on this, and who is really who's getting played here, and that's a tough. Those are tough decisions to make as an audience, let alone as a producer, I think.
That's very true. I mean, and and I think that you do kind of they can you know when you're watching something where it doesn't feel like like there were times with Joe Irvine on X Factor where it felt like he wasn't quite aware of how this was going to play out, and I've had conversations with him since, since that he isn't 100% happy with how what was framed to him with the contest versus how it played out and the level of support he kind of received afterwards, and I think those are very valid questions. But to returning to Alex's idea of the kind of the workplace type documentary, some of my favorite kind of works of kind of narrative non-fiction journalism have involved, like if I'm thinking of like Friday Night Lights or the breaks of the game, where they've just gone and the author has gone and sat in the community for long enough that they just became an accepted part of it, and painted a portrait of that community centering around a particular aspect of it. And there's no reason why you couldn't do that with a reality television format. It would be costly because of the time commitment and so on. But if it's good enough for our scripted long dramas, then why isn't it good enough to spend a year making an 8 or 20-part reality show that with that kind of pacing and gravity to it?
An ethnography,
yeah.
I'm aware that we're almost out of time, but I am curious as to whether either of you have a particular reality TV franchise that hasn't existed, that hasn't been brought to New Zealand, that you would want to see here.
Ooh, that's a really good question. Well, we're doing pretty well at this stage. We're definitely keeping up a bit. I don't know, we were talking about sort of those more fly on the wall, I guess, like the Ridges, what the Ridges tried to be. But it's just whether or not we have that kind of level of celebrity to have our own sort of keeping up with the Kardashians, which isn't, yeah.
You probably. We did talk about Big Brother, which is still I think would be fantastic, because I think New Zealanders have a reticence about them, and you just have to watch the New Zealand Bachelor versus the US Bachelor just to see how that manifests itself on screen. But I think the length of time that takes to play out, and plus the lack of downtime, means that something like that could be amazing. And I must say, I'm incredibly excited about the potential of Come and Dine With Me, because it kind of matches our reticence with alcohol. And
Our two strengths, Colin.
yeah. So I think that later on in those episodes we might get to see the real New Zealand.
I've always thought that we could do Tool Academy well. Are you familiar with the show
Yes,
Tool
I
Academy?
am.
No, what is that?
Tool Academy is a show where a bunch of quote-unquote studs enter a competition that they think is about who is the biggest stud, but it turns out they've all been nominated. They're all like asshole boyfriends.
It's like an
and
intervention
husbands.
show.
It's an intervention show, and they have to prove themselves and make up with their partners during the course of it. And the one who does the worst job of that gets. They symbolically leave alone in a taxi, and I think that is
That again gets the issue of consent.
plenty of material. So thank you, Duncan and Alex.
Thank you.
No, thanks for having
Yeah.
us. It seems extraordinary that we've been flown to Dunedin to talk about this shunned and vilified genre that we happen to love.
Well, thanks, and thanks everyone for coming. It's been good.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.